Now, one of the big things about hurricanes that has really caught the media's attention in the last handful of decades is naming hurricanes. Anytime we talk about a hurricane coming in, we have to talk about what the name is. So in this video, we're going to talk about why we name storms and the order in which storms are named. So first of all, do you know when a tropical cyclone gets a name? um, at what stage they receive their name? Is it a tropical disturbance, tropical depression, tropical storm, hurricane, or major hurricane? Well, most people know this answer. Hopefully you got this one right. If you didn't, here's the answer for you. When a tropical cyclone becomes a tropical storm, it officially gets a name. Okay, so naming a hurricane. The process of naming a hurricane has changed over the last few decades. In the early days, we used to just identify a storm by the latitude and longitude, but you can see how confusing this would get, because then you identify a hurricane at 15 degrees north and 75 degrees west, but the next time you make a report, the numbers are different. And so it's hard to keep track of all the different storms because the latitude and longitude are always changing. And so they started identifying the storms using code names, World War II code names, Able, Baker, Charlie. So Hurricane Center comes along and, oh, we've got Hurricane Able coming along. Now we've got Hurricane Baker. Oh, Hurricane Charlie just formed. This was much more useful because you could then distinguish one hurricane from another in the storm in the ocean. But there was another problem. What if Hurricane Baker was really strong one year, and then 3 years later, Hurricane Baker was strong there again? And someone says, oh, I remember Hurricane Baker and how devastating it was. And you say, well, which Hurricane Baker? Are we talking about Hurricane Baker from 1947 or Hurricane Baker from 1950? We don't know. And so we decided we need to change the names every year. So we started to use actual female names, alphabetical female names. We started doing that in 1953. Now, this is not a new concept. Actually, the concept of giving names to storms happened a long time before with religious clerics who are out on their missions in monasteries or wherever, keeping records of things that are happening in the area. And they say a big storm happened here on March 17th. And since it was March 17th when the storm hit, we are going to call it the St. Patrick's Day storm. So we've been in the habit of giving names for centuries to these storms. So then the question comes, well, why female names? Why are we only using female names? Well, the reason for that has to do with mariner tradition. Well, at least that's my assumption. I don't know for sure why just female, but I would assume it has to do with mariner tradition. If you hear a mariner um, talking about their ship, they would say, "Oh, she was a fine ship," or they passed through a storm. "Oh man, she was a wicked storm." It was always a she, and so that tradition just carried on, and we kept using female names. Well, that only lasted a couple of decades when finally we said, you know, we should throw in some male names too. And so 1978, we picked up the current pattern where we use alphabetical names, alternating female to male to female to male. One year, the A name is female, B would be male. But then the next year, the A hurricane would be male, the B would be female. It swaps every year, every other year. Okay, so what would stop us from confusing a Hurricane Minerva from one year from a Hurricane Minerva of another year? Well, the solution to that is when a hurricane becomes major, both in category 3 or higher, and in social impact, then we take that hurricane name and we retire it. For example, Andrew, Katrina, Camille, Irene, Sandy, Matthew, Irma, Maria, Michael. Those are names that have all been retired. because they all reached Category 3 strength or higher at some point in their life, and they had a huge impact on society. Okay, so there we are. We have our pattern, alphabetical female to male names that we've been using since 1978. When the storm becomes major, we retire the name and replace it with something else. This is a pattern that follows every 6 years. So in this chart, we're looking at hurricane names for 2019, 2020, 2021, all the way through 2024. So in 2019, we had Andrea, Barry, Chantal, and then we had Dorian. Remember that Dorian was the big one that came over the Bahamas and just parked itself over the Bahamas and caused a lot of devastation. It was a Category 5 storm, tied for the strongest hurricane on record in the Atlantic Basin, and so Dorian's name was retired. Okay, so then we went through the rest of 2019 and saw a number of these names happen. We're going to take these names from 2019 and reuse them in 2025. So in 2025, we will see Andrea, Barry, Chantal, and then they'll replace Dorian with some other name, some other hurricane, some other male name that starts with a D. Okay. So this year is 2020. These are the names for this year. Whatever names are retired, they'll be removed from the list and replaced with something new, and then replaced or reused in 2026. And yes, in the Pacific, we have a similar naming system, just different names. And this is the list of names. If you want a current list of hurricane names, you can go to the website that's at the bottom of the screen here, and that will show you the current list of names for the next 6 years. Currently, as of the time I made this video, which is in April of 2020, this is the list. They didn't have the 2025 names out yet. They're probably still working on what names were retired from 2019 and what they're going to replace them with. But anyway, you can check that at your will if you would like to know updates on those names.